playing politics with marijuana, all for the benefit of the government and big pharma at the expense of the average American. That's what marijuana advocates are arguing after a number of recent developments. The DEA has recently reclassified THC, the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana, to a Schedule III substance, while the marijuana plant itself remains a Schedule I substance, the kind that carries the harshest criminal penalties. Now, why would they do that? Well, apparently so that pharmaceutical companies can push products with naturally derived formations of THC. Meanwhile, Dr. Lyle E. Cracker, a professor at the University of Massachusetts, has dropped his nearly decade-long fight to persuade the government to allow him to grow marijuana for medical research. So, is the government really anti-marijuana, or do they just want to keep all the money that can be made from it at the top? Joining me to discuss it is Paul Armendano, Deputy Director of NORML and the co-author of Marijuana is Safer, So Why Are We Driving People to Drink? Paul, thanks so much for joining us. Now, first of all, can you give us a little bit more detail on this rescheduling? The DEA has said that marijuana has no scientifically proven medical value. So why now would they want pharmaceutical companies to be able to get their hands on it?
Well, just to be clear here, the DEA has announced their intent to reschedule both synthetic THC and plant-derived THC if the THC appears in FDA-approved products. So I don't want to jump the gun and imply this has already happened, but the DEA is on record saying that they are supportive of letting this change happen. Now, the reason, of course, they're doing this is because there is interest from several pharmaceutical companies who want to bring pharmaceutical products to market that are derived from compounds in the marijuana plant, because big pharma, just like millions of Americans and thousands of doctors, acknowledge, unlike the DEA, that marijuana holds medicinal value. And making this change will just typify this sort of political hypocrisy we have regarding what our federal policy says versus what the science says. This would be the equivalent of allowing vitamin C to be legal and to be marketed while prohibiting and incarcerating those who actually possess an orange. It doesn't make any sense.
Now, who really stands to benefit here? Because if big pharma is allowed to create products with this naturally derived THC, they probably have to get weed somewhere, right? And is the government then become their supplier?
You're actually correct. As you mentioned earlier, Lyle Cracker, by dropping his suit, this allows the monopoly to be maintained that exists right now. Under federal law, only the federal government can produce marijuana for research purposes. And the DEA has been very clear that no other providers should be licensed for this purpose. So if a pharmaceutical company, in fact, was to bring a drug to market that contains naturally derived THC, they would have to actually get the THC from the federal government.
I'm just curious, how much does the government sell weed for?
You would have to ask them.
Okay, so they're not necessarily spilling all the beans on that one yet. But I've also heard, and in talking about the Cracker case, people that are saying that the government's marijuana just isn't potent enough to do the proper medical research on it. Is that true?
Well, I certainly have not had the privilege of actually trying the government's marijuana, but I am told by reliable sources that, in fact, it is of very poor quality, and not the sort of quality that clinical researchers who work with marijuana ideally would want to work with. Certainly, any junior high student can go to their junior high and arguably obtain better quality marijuana, and that's really the problem with marijuana prohibition in our existing policies.
So, I mean, in that case, why would the government take such a strong stance when it comes to marijuana, where they don't want to put money into research to see if there might be possible benefits, but they're maybe willing to play with the pharmaceutical companies here?
Because in this case, they're actually responding to leverage that's been placed upon them by the pharmaceutical companies. There are 4 separate companies that have petitioned the Department of Health and Human Services and also the DEA to make this change. The DEA is not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're not doing this because they have suddenly acknowledged the literally thousands of years of existing evidence supporting marijuana's use as a therapeutic agent. They're doing this because certain companies are leaning on them to do so, and they're responding to that pressure.
But 15 states in the U.S. have already legalized medical marijuana. I would say that that's pressure as well, wouldn't you there? And yet, you know, if this really goes through, this rescheduling, those people would still be criminalized?
Yes, of course. If this policy was guided by science, or in fact, even if it was guided by public opinion, as you just noted, we would certainly have a much different public policy than the one we have now. Unfortunately, this policy for far too long has not been guided by science, nor has it been guided by what the public wants.
All right, Paul, and very quickly, do you think that it's only a matter of time until we do see this rescheduling go through?
I certainly do, and I don't, in and of itself, think the rescheduling is a bad thing. It's an acknowledgement of marijuana's medical utility, and it will allow for the promulgation of products based on marijuana. That ultimately is a good thing, but we shouldn't be criminalizing patients in the interim.
Okay, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see if the government does make a lot of money off this. I'm very curious to know how much they sell their weed for. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Justice, it's not about agenda, it's not about mobilizing people, it's about dialing for corporate dollars. These two parties have sold the U.S. government and the American people to the highest bidders.